The lie I told myself was that I was taking a job. Archivist for a private collection. The ad was cryptic, tucked away in an academic journal, offering an obscene salary for 6 months of absolute seclusion. It was perfect. I was good at disappearing. The gate, a wrought iron monstrosity of tangled vines and birds, groaned open as my taxi approached, and then closed behind us with a pneumatic hiss that sounded unnervingly final. The house wasn't a mansion. It was a geological feature. A mountain of dark stone and leaded glass that looked like it had grown out of the earth rather than been built upon it. Her name was Serafina Vance. She met me at the door herself, no butler, no staff, just a tall, severe woman in a simple black dress. She looked like a portrait from another century, all sharp angles and pale skin, with eyes the color of a winter storm. She was older than me, maybe by 15 years, and carried herself with a stillness that was both elegant and unnerving. She didn't smile. "Miss Croft," she said, her voice a low contralto that seemed to vibrate in the cavernous entryway. I nodded, my own name sounding foreign. "You can call me Alara." She inclined her head, a gesture that was neither warm nor welcoming. She took my single suitcase, her hand brushing mine. Her skin was cool, like marble. The shock of it was electric, a jolt of life in the oppressive silence of the hall. She led me inside, and as I stepped over the threshold, she closed the heavy oak door behind me. I heard the sound before I understood it. A series of metallic clicks. The solid, final thud of a deadbolt sliding home. I turned, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs. She was standing there, her back to the door, a heavy, ornate key in her hand. She didn't look at me. She looked at the key as if it were a distasteful object she was forced to hold. "A precaution," she said, her voice betraying nothing. "The collection is valuable." My own voice was a thin thread. "A precaution?" She finally met my gaze. Her storm gray eyes held no malice, only a profound, bottomless weariness. "The world is loud, Alara. Intrusive. In here, it is quiet. That is the arrangement." She slipped the key into the pocket of her dress, and the silence that followed was heavier than any sound I had ever heard. I wasn't her archivist. I was part of the collection. The first week was a study in silence and space. The Vance collection was less a library and more a labyrinth of paper and forgotten time. It filled an entire wing of the house, 3 floors of shelves groaning under the weight of leather-bound histories, forgotten poetry, and scientific treatises that smelled of dust and vanilla. My job, as she'd outlined it in a few clipped sentences, was to create a digital catalog. A simple, Sisyphean task. I worked because it was the only thing to do. The rhythm of opening a book, breathing in its history, and transcribing its soul onto a sterile spreadsheet became my anchor. I tried not to think about the locked door. I tried not to think about the fact that my phone had no signal and the house's internet was a closed network, a digital island with no bridges to the outside world. Serafina was a ghost in her own home. I would catch glimpses of her, a silhouette in a distant window, the faint scent of lavender and old paper lingering in a hallway. We ate in the same cavernous dining room, at opposite ends of a table long enough to host a royal banquet. The meals appeared on a dumbwaiter from some unseen kitchen below, always simple, always delicious. We never spoke during those meals. The only sounds were the scrape of silver on porcelain and the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall, counting down the seconds of my gilded imprisonment. I found myself watching her. It was a dangerous, obsessive habit. I watched the way her long, pale fingers held a fork, the slight tremor in her hand when she lifted a glass of water to her lips. I watched the column of her throat as she swallowed. I saw the exhaustion etched in the fine lines around her eyes, a weariness that the perfect, severe set of her face couldn't quite conceal. One afternoon, I was struggling to reach a heavy folio on a top shelf. I was balanced precariously on a rolling ladder when her voice, quiet and close, made me jump. "Allow me." I hadn't heard her approach. She was right behind me, her presence a sudden, intense pressure in the air. She reached up, her body pressing lightly against the ladder, her arms stretching past my shoulder. I was trapped between the wood of the shelf and the unexpected warmth of her. I could smell the clean, crisp scent of her skin. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. She retrieved the book with ease and handed it to me, her fingers brushing mine. Another jolt, stronger this time. "Thank you," I managed to whisper, my voice hoarse. She just nodded, her gray eyes lingering on my face for a fraction of a second too long before she turned and walked away, her footsteps silent on the thick Persian rug. I stood there for a long time, the heavy book in my hands, my heart hammering against my ribs. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but something else was stirring alongside it. A terrifying, unwelcome curiosity. A flicker of warmth in the cold, silent prison she had built for us both. The routines became a form of communication. I learned that she took her coffee black on the east-facing terrace at precisely 7 a.m., regardless of the weather. I started taking mine there, too, sitting at a small table 20 feet away, pretending to be absorbed in a book. The silence between us began to change. It was no longer a void, but a shared space. It became companionable, charged with unspoken questions. I learned she couldn't sleep through the night. I'd hear the soft creak of floorboards from her wing of the house at 2 or 3 in the morning. I'd lie awake in my own bed, listening, imagining her wandering the dark, silent halls, a lonely queen in a kingdom of dust and shadows. One evening, after a particularly sterile, silent dinner, I found myself unable to face the solitude of my room. I went back to the library, the one place that felt like mine. I found her there, curled in a worn leather armchair by the unlit fireplace, a book lying open in her lap. She wasn't reading. She was just staring into the empty hearth. She looked smaller in the dim light, less imposing. Vulnerable. "I couldn't sleep," I said, my voice startlingly loud in the quiet. She looked up, her expression unreadable. She didn't tell me to leave. Instead, she gestured to the armchair opposite hers. "Neither can I sat. For a long time, we just existed in the same space, the silence stretching between us like a thread. "Why did you answer the ad?" she asked finally, her gaze still fixed on the fireplace. The question caught me off guard. "I needed a job. I'm good with old books," it was a half-truth, and we both knew it. "Everyone is running from something," she said, more to the fireplace than to me. "What is your something, Alara?" I thought of the screaming matches, the broken promises, the suffocating weight of a love that had turned into a cage far more restrictive than this house. "A loud life," I said, the words tasting like ash. I needed quiet. A faint, sad smile touched her lips for the first time since I'd arrived. It was a devastating sight. It transformed her face, softening the severe lines, revealing a glimpse of the woman beneath the armor. "Then you've come to the right place," she murmured. "This house is built on quiet." That night, the dynamic shifted. We weren't jailer and prisoner anymore. We were two lonely people, sitting in the dark, admitting, without admitting it, that we were both hiding. The locked door wasn't just to keep me in, it was to keep everything else out. And I started to wonder, with a terrifying lurch in my chest, if I was on the wrong side of it. After that night, the walls between us, both literal and metaphorical, began to feel more porous. We started speaking during meals. The conversations were stilted at first, explorations of safe territory, the provenance of a manuscript, the quality of the coffee, the way the late afternoon sun hit the stained glass window at the end of the hall. But gradually, they deepened. She asked me about my studies, and for the first time in years, I found myself speaking passionately about medieval poetry, my voice echoing slightly in the grand dining room. I watched, fascinated, as she listened. She truly listened, her head tilted, her gray eyes focused and intelligent, asking questions that showed she understood not just what I was saying, but what I meant. She started joining me in the library in the evenings. She wouldn't work, just sit in her armchair while I tapped away at my laptop. Her presence was a quiet weight, a comfort. I found my focus sharpening, the loneliness that had been my constant companion for so long beginning to recede. I started leaving things for her, a book of poetry I thought she might like left on the arm of her chair, a particularly beautiful botanical print placed on the dining table next to her plate. She never acknowledged them directly, But the next day, the book would be on her nightstand, the print framed and hanging in the hall. It was a silent conversation, a language of objects and gestures that felt more intimate than words. One afternoon, I was working on a series of letters bound in faded blue ribbon. They were love letters, filled with an aching, desperate passion. As I read them, a profound sadness washed over me, a loneliness so sharp it felt like a physical pain. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear splashed onto the delicate paper. "Are you all right?" Her voice was soft, laced with a concern that made my breath catch. She was standing over my desk, a teacup in her hand. She placed it beside me, the steam rising in a fragrant cloud of bergamot. "It's just, they loved each other so much," I said, gesturing to the letters, feeling foolish. She picked one up, her touch impossibly gentle on the fragile paper. She read a passage aloud, her low voice giving the century-old words a new, vibrant life. "My soul is a desolate landscape until you walk upon it," she looked at me, and her eyes were filled with an ancient, familiar sorrow. Love is not always a kindness, Alara. In that moment, I saw her. Not Serafina Vance, the eccentric recluse and my captor. I saw a woman who had been deeply, terribly wounded. A woman who had retreated from the world because it had broken her. The urge to reach out, to smooth the worried line between her brows, was so overwhelming it made my hands tremble. I clenched them in my lap, anchoring myself. The air between us was thick with everything we weren't saying. The locked door was no longer a barrier, it was the entire shape of our world, and inside it, we were slowly, terrifyingly, learning to see one another. The storm arrived without warning. One minute, the sky was a placid, hazy blue, the next, it was the color of a bruise. The wind began to howl, rattling the old window frames, and the first fat drops of rain hit the glass like stones. I've always loved storms, the raw power of them, but this one felt different. It felt personal, as if the turmoil outside was a reflection of the growing tempest inside me. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the vast house into a disorienting twilight. The emergency generator didn't kick in. We were adrift in the roaring dark. "Serafina," I called out, my voice small against the cacophony of the wind and rain. No answer. A primal fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my strange contentment. I fumbled for my phone, its weak light a pathetic sword against the oppressive darkness. I found her in the music room, a place I'd never seen her enter before. She was huddled on a window seat, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring out at the violent thrashing of the trees. The flashes of lightning illuminated her face, stark white and slick with tears. She was terrified. The woman who commanded this entire world with silent, steely control was completely undone by a storm. I went to her, my footsteps swallowed by a clap of thunder that shook the very foundations of the house. I sat beside her on the window seat, not touching, just offering my presence as a shield. "It's just a storm," I said softly. "It can't get in." Her voice, when she finally spoke, was a ragged whisper. "He left during a storm just like this." The confession hung in the air between us, a ghost finally given voice. I didn't need to ask who he was. The pain in her voice was the answer. It was the reason for the silence, the isolation, the locked door. She had built this fortress not to keep the world out, but to keep the memory of one person from ever leaving. Another crash of thunder, closer this time, and she flinched violently, a choked sob escaping her lips. Without thinking, I closed the small distance between us. I put my arm around her shoulders, pulling her against me. She was trembling. She resisted for a moment, her body stiff with shock, and then she collapsed, melting into me, her face buried in my shoulder. Her quiet, controlled grief broke open, and she wept. She wept for the man who left in the storm, for the years she had lost to her sorrow, for the quiet, lonely prison she had built. I held her, stroking her hair, murmuring meaningless, comforting things, my own tears mixing with hers. The storm raged outside, and a different kind of storm raged within the circle of my arms. In the darkness, with the world roaring around us, all pretense fell away. We were just two people, clinging to each other for warmth, for comfort, for a reason to believe the dawn would come. The storm broke sometime before dawn. I woke with a crick in my neck, still on the window seat, with Serafina's head resting on my lap. She was asleep, her face peaceful in the pale, pre-dawn light. The tear tracks were gone, and the severe lines of her face were softened, making her look younger, more fragile. I watched her breathe, the slow, steady rise and fall of her chest, and a feeling I couldn't name, a fierce, protective tenderness, swelled inside me. This woman, who had taken my freedom, had somehow given me a different kind of sanctuary. I had been running from the noise of a broken heart, and I had run straight into the quiet center of another's. Carefully, so as not to wake her, I brushed a stray strand of silver-flecked hair from her forehead. My fingers lingered on her temple, the skin soft and cool. Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, there was no guard, no wall. There was only the raw, unguarded gray of her gaze meeting mine. Confusion, then awareness, then something deeper, something that mirrored the frantic beating of my own heart. She didn't pull away. She didn't speak. She simply watched me, her breath hitching slightly as my thumb traced the elegant line of her cheekbone. The world had shrunk to this single point of contact. The vast, silent house, the storm, the locked door, it all faded away, leaving only the charged space between us. I leaned down, a magnetic pull I was powerless to resist. It was a question, not a demand. Her eyes fluttered shut, a silent consent. The first touch of our lips was hesitant, soft as a sigh. It was a taste of rain and salt and years of unspoken loneliness. Then, something broke open in both of us. She brought a hand up to cup the back of my neck, her fingers tangling in my hair, pulling me closer. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry, desperate. It wasn't about passion in that moment, it was about recognition. It was the shattering of solitude, the wild, terrifying relief of being truly seen. We were two desolate landscapes, and we were finally walking upon each other. When we finally broke apart, gasping for air, the first rays of the rising sun were spilling through the window, bathing us in a warm, golden light. The world outside was washed clean, glistening, and new. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, a new world had been born, right here in this room. The morning after was a study in quiet reverence. We didn't speak of what had happened. We didn't need to. The air itself had changed. It was lighter, clearer. We made coffee together in the main kitchen, a room I hadn't even known existed, its stainless steel surfaces gleaming in the morning sun. We moved around each other with an unconscious, synchronized grace, our hands brushing as we reached for the same cupboard, our shoulders touching as we stood side by side, waiting for the coffee to brew. Each accidental touch was a spark, a reaffirmation of the night before. We took our mugs to the terrace. The air was cool and smelled of wet earth and clean stone. The world looked remade. We sat at the same small table, side by side this time, our knees occasionally touching. The 20 feet of space that had separated us for months had vanished. Serafina watched me over the rim of her cup, her eyes clear and impossibly soft. The weary sadness was still there, a shadow in their depths, but it was no longer the defining feature. It was part of a landscape that now also held hope. I could see it. It was terrifying and beautiful. After a long, comfortable silence, she set her cup down. She reached into the pocket of her silk robe and pulled out the heavy, ornate key. The key to the front door. It looked different in the morning light, less like a tool of imprisonment and more like an artifact from a past life. She slid it across the cool stone of the table. It stopped just before my hand. "The arrangement has changed," she said, her voice even, but I could hear the tremor beneath the surface. "The world is still loud. It is still intrusive. But you are not a part of my collection, Alara. You never were." I stared at the key. My freedom, lying there between us. 6 months ago, I would have snatched it up without a second thought. I would have run and never looked back. I thought about the life I'd left behind, the noise, the arguments, the feeling of being fundamentally misunderstood. I thought about the quiet rhythm of this house, the scent of old books, the comfort of a shared silence, the shocking, life-altering warmth of this woman's hand in mine. Escape felt less like a liberation and more like an amputation. I would be leaving a part of myself behind, locked in this house with her. This place had become more than a sanctuary from the outside world. It had become the place I finally found a piece of myself I didn't know was missing. What if I don't want to go? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I looked up from the key and met her gaze. I let her see everything, the fear, the longing, the desperate, blooming hope. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. It was like watching the sun rise for the very first time. I was rather hoping, she said softly, that you would say that. I didn't take the key. I left it on the table, a silent testament to a choice made. It remained there for days, a small, brass reminder that the door was no longer locked against my will, but by our mutual consent. It was a barrier against the world we had both decided we did not need. Our life settled into a new rhythm, one defined not by distance and observation, but by a quiet, burgeoning intimacy. We still worked, me in the library and she in her study, but our days were punctuated by shared moments. She would bring me a cup of tea in the afternoon, her hand lingering on my shoulder as she set it down. I would read to her in the evenings by the fire, my voice filling the silence that had once been so oppressive. We explored the house together, discovering forgotten rooms and secret passages, our laughter echoing in spaces that had not heard the sound in years. We were mapping the architecture of the house, and in doing so, we were mapping the architecture of each other. She told me about him. His name was Julian. He was a musician, a brilliant, tempestuous man who filled the house with sound and life, and then, one day, emptied it of everything when he left. She spoke of him without the raw pain of that night in the storm, but with a gentle, reflective sadness. She was not a ghost haunting a memory anymore. She was a woman tending to an old wound, and she was letting me help her. I, in turn, told her about my own loud life. About a love that had demanded I shrink myself, sand down my edges, until there was almost nothing left. I told her how I had mistaken possession for passion, noise for life. In the quiet of her library, with her hand resting gently on my knee, the story lost its power over me. It became just that, a story. Something that had happened to a version of me that no longer existed. One evening, we were standing on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in violent, beautiful strokes of orange and purple. A cool breeze stirred the air. She turned to me, her silver-streaked hair catching the last of the light. I haven't been outside the gates in 7 years, she said. The statement was simple, factual, yet it held the weight of 1,000 lonely days. I took her hand, my fingers lacing through hers. Her skin was warm. Maybe we could walk to the gate tomorrow, I suggested gently. I saw a flicker of the old fear in her eyes, the instinct to retreat behind her walls. But then she squeezed my hand, a firm, grounding pressure. Yes, she said, her voice clear and steady. I think I would like that. The key still sat on the stone table, glinting in the twilight. We didn't need it. We had found a different way out. Or perhaps a different way in. We were not prisoners of the quiet house anymore. We were its keepers. And together, we were finally learning how to live in it.